22nd, 1963. Where were you? A Larry King TNT special live from Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry King.
Welcome back. We're going for another full hour. Harry Belafonte is with us, one of the great legendary figures in American show business history. Just packed him in Germany. Harry Belafonte was in Paris the day Kennedy was killed. Jim Lehrer of the McNeil-Lehrer Report, one of journalism's better moments on a nightly basis. Mr. Lehrer was covering, he was part of a team of reporters covering in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963 for the Dallas Times-Herald. And Hugh Downs, who was then the anchor of the Today Show, Hugh Downs, now, of course, the co-anchor with Barbara Walters of ABC's 2020. Hugh was walking in the hall after lunch when he heard the news. The politicians who shared power with John Kennedy have special memories of him, even the Republicans. And so did those in the generation that followed. Among them, the President of the United States. Watch.
I was in fourth period advanced math. There were 7 students in the class. And the teacher, we met in an annex. The teacher was the assistant principal for the annex building. And he was called to the phone, something that, as far as I know, never happened at any other time. He came back totally ashen-faced. I'll never forget it in my life. I never saw such a desolate look on a man's face. And said that the president had been shot and probably killed.
You had just, you had met him.
Yes, that was November. I'd met him in July.
I was in school. I was walking along the pathway. I think I was a sophomore in high school. And a classmate said, "Did you hear the news?" And I said, "No, what?" And he told me, and it just hit like a thunderbolt.
You don't have Nixon to kick around anymore.
After losing the presidency to Kennedy in 1960 and the California governorship in 62, Richard Nixon went back to practicing law. Eerily, on November 22nd, he flew out of Dallas on business.
Did you believe the Warren Commission?
I did not study it carefully, and I have never questioned it before, and I don't question it now. A lot is being read, but the reason that I don't is just nothing's going to happen as a result.
Barry Goldwater would be the next Republican nominee in 64. He and Kennedy were friends. They'd already planned their campaign.
That would have been one hell of a campaign. We were going to either rent an airplane or buy an airplane. And, for example, we'd go to Omaha, and he'd get off and make this pitch. And then I would rebut. Then we'd fly, say, to Sioux City, and I would make the opening, and he would rebut. And in this way, we felt the American people could learn about debate and about the issues and about what each side thought.
For a man who would one day be president, politics was still a long way off in 1963. It was the end of the peanut season.
Getting ready to gin cotton, and had come back from lunch, heard that Kennedy had been shot. I assumed at first it was not serious, and then the word came through that he was dead. I went out in the back, sat on the steps and cried, and have never gotten over it.
Jimmy Carter never met Kennedy, but the president whom Carter would defeat in 1976 had a personal connection.
When I first went to the Congress in 1949, by pure happenstance, my office in the old House office building was right across the corridor from Congressman John F. Kennedy. So over the next 4 to 6 years, Jack Kennedy and I became very good personal friends.
Another Republican on the rise in 1963 would 20 years later become Ronald Reagan's Secretary of State. A young George Shultz spent that terrible day at his desk at the Labor Department in the heart of a stricken capital.
It was quiet, dead, depressed. We had some, we thought, important meetings that were about to happen, and they just didn't happen. Nobody canceled them. They just didn't happen. We all sat around and talked to each other.
When it became clear what had happened, the best thing that
we could think to do was to go down to church, St. Charles Borromeo Church in Brooklyn Heights, and look for some consolation there. Because it was clear that listening to the descriptions of what was going on, nobody really understood. Why? Why should this happen? And Kennedy was much more than a human being. I mean, he was a force that represented so much in the society, so much by way of aspiration and hope, that when all of that was dashed, it was an extraordinary experience. It was a disorienting experience.
Politics is different now. Gary Hart and Bill Clinton tried to reignite the Kennedy flame. It's been hard. It seems harder now to believe the way so many believed in JFK. And now 2 generations share power, JFK's and the next. The nation's top Democrat today was in high school in a math class on November 22nd, 1963. The top Republican was already in Congress.
I was on an airplane headed for Kansas City, and between Washington, D.C. and Chicago, we heard about the terrible tragedy. I'd met him, had a picture taken with him, and I'm certain he didn't know Bob Dole, but I knew Jack Kennedy, the President of the United States.
Few men were closer to President Kennedy than our next special guest. He was both a personal friend and a professional journalist. Please welcome a principal figure in Washington for these 30 years and more, the retired executive editor of the Washington Post, the ageless Ben Bradley. How close a friend?
Yeah, well, it's self-serving, but he was a good friend.
One of your better friends?
Yes.
Make it difficult to cover him because of that?
Yes, from time to time.
Where were you when he died, Ben?
I was on my lunch hour in a bookstore at the bottom of the press building, reading, you know, through the stacks, and suddenly I heard people start to whisper, and it got louder and louder, and the word shot came through, and then Kennedy came through. And I rushed up to my office, which was on the 12th floor. And
you were with Newsweek then?
I was the bureau chief of, I think I was the bureau chief, maybe I wasn't. Yeah, I was the bureau chief of Newsweek. And the ticker, UP ticker, was there with that terrible bell going incessantly. And I read the dispatch that he was been shot. And then very quickly the dispatch that he was dead.
2 things are happening here. Newsweek, I think, goes to bed, as they say, on a Saturday, right?
Comes out Friday night is the point of no return.
So are you first now a close friend who's lost a close friend, or are you the bureau chief?
Well, you had to be both. I mean, you couldn't stop being one, and yet you had the job, and I think that's what saved me. I had so much to do. I mean, they threw out the whole magazine and started a new magazine. But there was this terrible moment of trying to come to grips with something that defied understanding. And one of the things that I don't remember paying any attention to who killed him. I mean, it was of no moment to me.
That would have been different.
Well, I think I did share Harry's flash that I hoped it wasn't a black man.
You did too?
Yes, I did.
But you were concentrating on, of course, the loss of
you had a loss of a friend and so much to do. I mean, we were saved by our work. We were saved by our work. We had to assign. I had to write a piece for the overnight, and then there was when the president's body came back.
Where were you?
Well, I went out to that hospital and waited. I think someone just thought it might be a good idea if some of the friends were there, and it was a terrible night.
That was the hospital where the
Kennedy's body was taken, and where Mrs. Kennedy came, and where all the friends were gathered, and where the decision started to be made as to where he would be buried. And
were you a journalist there or a friend?
Well, I guess, I mean, I was a friend there because I wouldn't have been invited if I had been if I'd just been a journalist.
So did you then do a story about that or not?
I did a story for the paper, for the magazine about an appreciation of him, and I talked to the reporter who wrote the final story. But what went on in that hospital suite was of no great historical moment. It was a personal thing.
What did you mean by the term "Johnny, we hardly knew ye"?
Well, that's an old Irish song. That wasn't mine. That was Kenny O'Donnell's and Dave.
But the term itself is one of obvious closeness and friendship and missing and...
Well, there was the thing that nobody got to know him because his life was cut off in the you know, he was only 45. How old was he? 45, and that's
45.
He'd
46,
still be,
I think.
He'd still be kicking around now. God knows what he would have been doing since 19.
What kind of friend was he?
Well, you know, if your friend is the President of the United States, the rules are different. You're a friend at his, you're at his beck and call. You don't go there if you're not asked.
And it's not like dropping in.
No, you don't drop in, and he doesn't drop in back. As he said, you go into the White House with the friends you have. You don't make any new ones. And I think that was true.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's surprising.
Well, I mean, you know, there aren't... The social occasions where you meet and make new friends don't pop up much at the White House.
You got a good point, man.
And you would never know, once you were the president, you would not know who was really a friend or who was currying favor. You're cut off from that.
Yeah, you are.
And when someone that young dies and you're that age, are there feelings of your own mortality?
Well, they had probably already set in, but yes, I think, sure. I mean, he was...
Not supposed to die.
Oh, no, he wasn't supposed to die.
Not that way.
Yeah.
Not anyway.
Not then. Not then and not anyway. And so much of his presidency seemed to me, and even then, on the come, the thing that I missed was the promise that seemed to exist in America at that time. And I missed that. I don't see that. I don't know whether America lost its innocence or not, but there was a surge of joy and hope and promise and confidence that seems to me to have gone out of us at that time.
And not back.
Well, not all the way back. No, it's not back.
And we'll be back with more Pierre Salinger still to come, and more phone calls, and some surprises as well. Don't go away. Why does it...
Those 3 days until the funeral, I think I did nothing else except watch television.
Before he was president, he was a World War II hero.
Get those men out of the water!
Cliff Robertson stars in the true story of John F. Kennedy and the crew of PT-109. Tonight at 9:30 Eastern on TNT.
Will we claim the new Norelco razor shaves closer than ever without hundreds of tests to back it up? Say our new precision groove helps the Norelco lift and cut system shave closer without proof? No. We wouldn't say it's our closest shave ever without science, sensors, tests. But of all the tests that prove it's closer, the most convincing requires a personal touch. The new Norelco razors, our closest shave ever.
This may seem like any other day, but it's not. Because now people will be able to talk to one another in a brand new way. That's because across the U.S. and Canada, leading cellular communications companies have joined together to create MobileLink, a new standard in cellular service. So now, whenever you need to stay in touch, MobileLink will make it as simple as a phone call. MobileLink.
Hello? I'm glad you called.
It's simply the way to communicate. To order, call 1-800-995-4000.
As this is said to be the decade families will be hunting for real value, Volvo thought it best to make that search a little easier. Introducing Volvo Affordable Pricing. Available on new 1994 cars, it's Volvo's way of hitting families right where it helps.
There are just 2 reasons to buy a Macintosh personal computer instead of a PC. 1, Macintosh does more. 2, Macintosh costs less. Which really makes your choice quite simple.
Weber, Hardaway, Warriors, Magic, Tuesday at 8 on TNT.
Along with 50 other standard amenities, the Nissan Maxima GXE has a keyless entry system on the door. This system allows you to unlock doors, open the trunk, and even open windows automatically. But if you think the door is impressive, just imagine what's behind it. Now lease a Maxima with a standard V6 for just $1,000 down and $289 a month for 36 months.
It's fun, fun, fun.
What fun?
The Kids Club at Enfield Square every Tuesday at 9:30 in Center Court. Join the Kids Club and find something new, amazing, magical, and fun. Plus, you can meet the Kids Club pals. This Tuesday, November 23rd, join us for a very special Thanksgiving celebration.
Yeah, I want to go.
Then join the Enfield Square Kids Club every Tuesday at 9:30 at Center Court for quality entertainment, discounts, giveaways, and
Kids Club fun.
Now, once again, Larry King.
We're back on this special TNT edition of November 22nd, 1963. Where were you? Our numbers east of the Mississippi, 1-800-879-2166. West of the Mississippi, 800-879-3166. With Ben Bradley, Harry Belafonte, Jim Lair, and Hugh Downs. We'll start intermingling more phone calls, as well as some comments from the gang. Boulder, Colorado, hello.
Yes, hello. The death of President Kennedy was perhaps my very first memory. I was 3 and almost 4 years old living in Biloxi, Mississippi. My mom had just put me down for my afternoon nap while she watched the soap operas. And all of a sudden she came running into the room and she kept saying, "Don't forget this day. Never forget this. This is important to remember. The President of the United States has been killed." And I didn't really know who the president was or what that was all about, but I remember so clearly sitting in the living room on the floor while she was crying, watching the TV and holding her hand. And I remember watching John and Carolyn and feeling that they'd lost their dad. And it's always been such a startling memory to me, such an important first memory.
Why are we, Harry, do you think, transfixed by it? I mean, it's 30 years and the image comes up on the screen and you cannot not look at it.
I think it's just very hard to accept the fact that this thing happened. This thing happened in America. This thing happened at a time when so much was, the expectations were so high. So many promises were in the air. So much was involved in that time that the death of Kennedy became synonymous with. Whether we fulfilled it or failed to fulfill it will always be measured by whether or not Kennedy was alive. Like it was just said, had he lived, what would the world have turned out to be?
Jim?
Yeah, I agree with that. It was the first monumental tragedy that we had here in this country. We'd had wars, but the wars had all been fought somewhere else. They were personal tragedies to the families of people who died in these wars. But this happened right here, and we've had. If it were happened tomorrow, it would be another one of those things, one of those terrible tragedies. But this was the first one of that magnitude.
You?
Yeah, in a way, it was the first one after Lincoln, I'd say, because. But we have to remember that Lincoln was killed, McKinley was killed, there were attempts on Garfield, there were attempts on the life of Harry Truman and Ronald Reagan. So assassination is not totally foreign to the American character, unfortunately. It's just, but what then is it about the fact that when Kennedy was killed, something bigger happened? And I haven't sorted that out myself yet, but I admit what you say.
Okay, 30 years we haven't sorted out. Ben thinks it was the loss of promise. Had to be more than that.
Well, what kind of a country would it be that was not transfixed by this event? I mean, you'd have to be...
30 years of transfixion.
30 years.
He goes up in popularity every year, according to polls. I guess if students voted today, he comes in the most popular president.
Well, I don't have to explain it to myself. I was devastated by it, and something that devastating to a country deserves to be remembered.
Fort Worth, Texas. Hello.
Mr. Lair mentioned earlier that this was really a turnaround trip to Dallas, but the Kennedys did have one more stop to make, and I'm holding in my hands the tickets that we had to the dinner in Austin, Texas that night. We left Midland, Texas so excited over the fact that we were going to get to be at the dinner, and about San Angelo, Texas, we heard it on the news.
I stand corrected. I had completely forgotten about that they were going to Austin, because there was a big hullabaloo about whether it was Senator Yarborough's trip or Vice President Johnson's trip, all the politics. I stand corrected, ma'am.
You still have the tickets, ma'am?
Yes, I have them in my hand.
What does it say?
It says Texas Welcome Dinner in honor of President John F. Kennedy and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Municipal Auditorium.
Scheduled for Friday night?
City of Austin, 7:30 o'clock, Friday evening, November 22nd, 1963.
Thank you.
Yes.
Warwick, New York. Hello.
Hi, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in West Africa, in Senegal, and we were just sitting down to dinner about 7 o'clock, and a knock came at the door, and a small Senegalese boy came in and said in Wolof, the chief is dead, or your chief is dead. And we looked at each other and said, he must mean de Gaulle. And when we said that, the kid shook his head and said, no, your chief. And we looked at each other and said, could he possibly mean Kennedy? And the kid nodded his head, and we said, must be something wrong. And we went down to the local Senegalese army post and heard it on their shortwave radio. And all the next day, Senegalese we didn't know at all came trooping to the house. They would shake our hands, stay for 5 minutes, and not say a word, shake our hands again and leave.
This worldwide impact, explain, I mean, all presidents have a power and impact, but this touching people in Senegal and in Tokyo and in Ashken, in Paris, were there much dismay in Paris?
Enormous dismay. But when you talk about the developing nations, as young as the idea was, the Peace Corps had taken very, very strong hold in developing countries. There was a huge promise to this American experiment, this world experiment. And everywhere volunteers went, it was the best part of America that was being expressed in the remotest villages of the world. The nobility and the honor of this country was at stake, or at least being interpreted by every volunteer. So the loss of this man who was so pivotal to this experiment carried a wave of great pain and anguish for people who then said, what will happen?
So there wasn't a place anywhere on the globe this didn't touch emotionally?
One really has to understand, I think Bill is right, he doesn't have to remember, but Kennedy was involved with so much hope globally, so much promise. He had confronted the Bay of Pigs, he was getting along with Khrushchev, and they were working things out. I mean, he didn't back off the civil rights movement. I'm surprised that there aren't some women on the panel here, because women in that period were beginning to all of a sudden become ennobled themselves.
We tried, but in 1963, first of all, you tried to limit a panel, and Barbara Walters was going to try very hard to make it, but she had to be in Seattle. But prominent women in 1963.
Journalists, you mean?
Women journalists weren't, right, Ben?
I guess the ones that were most prominent then aren't with us anymore. Eleanor Roosevelt.
Eleanor Roosevelt.
Well, there was May Craig. May Craig of the Portland Press Herald, that wonderful little hat that came down over her head.
But my only point is that I believe that much of America's bewilderment is that women are in struggle for their rights, homosexuals, blacks, everybody, unemployment, AIDS. There seems to be just such tremendous chaos. And the only time we can remember, at least in my adult life, where America was at its best and there was a promise for good things was the Kennedy era.
It was pre-nitty-gritty, though.
That's absolutely.
I mean, it was before it got down to the cut.
It was promise.
Yeah, exactly.
It was Camelot. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hello.
Hello there. I was in Houston, Texas, at my father's feet. He was at that time, he was the editor of the state desk for the Houston Post. And we were at home. Mother was fixing something in the kitchen. And the phone rang, and I didn't see my father, as I believe Mr. Downs said, for 4 days. But he did call in from time to time. And the thing that I found most amazing was my mother telling me what was going on, and the fact that he couldn't get a hold of, he kept trying to get information out of Dallas, and he couldn't get anything. He talked to people up there, and they wouldn't say anything, was his experience. And it was very frustrating for him. He wanted to talk to Oswald. Oswald was saying he wanted to talk to the press. They had the press conference. He couldn't get up there. It was like 15 minutes. And then they had the press conference. And then he came home, went to sleep, got up. It was that afternoon, and they shot Oswald. Exactly. And he was gone for another 3 days.
Do we remember it as a haze of confusion, Jim Hugh?
Sure. You notice he used the term, they shot Oswald? It's interesting.
They shot Oswald.
They shot Oswald. It's, I've heard other people refer to this whole thing. They shot Kennedy, they shot Oswald. It's kind of they. I don't mean a big conspiracy. It's just the way people think of it.
We'll get a break and come back, and Pierre Salinger will join us. Don't go away. You know, that's...
He was trying to do something that we desperately needed. We needed unity in our country. We needed racial unity. He was just there at the right time, and when he got shot, that was it.
Coming up, a naval commander and his crew clash with an enemy destroyer in the Pacific. Cliff Robertson plays war hero John F. Kennedy in PT-109. Then, TNT recounts your memories of the Kennedy assassination in an encore presentation of the Larry King Special, November 22nd, 1963. Where were you?
If your VCR is a pain to program, then get rid of it and get the RCA VCR with VCR Plus and cable box channel control. To record a show, just look for the VCR Plus code in your TV listing, then punch it in. It's as simple as that. So if you've had it with your old VCR, get rid of it and get the first one with VCR Plus and cable box channel control built in. Buy select RCA entertainment products and we'll send you Nipper and Chipper.
Car has finally grown up. Introducing the Volvo 850 Sports Wagon.
Yeah, I'll marry you.
Wonderful! I'm calling everybody in France. Only, I'm an AT&T. I pay the highest first minute and additional minute rate, 7 a.m., 1 p.m. 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. is a little better. I have to wait until after 6 for the real discount.
Why wait? MCI has a new way you can call anytime. Now we give you low fixed rates 24 hours a day, plus the lowest priced international calls to any 2 numbers.
You know, since I've had all this time to think.
For the easiest way to save on international calls, join friends around the world anytime.
Listen.
See the future.
See it now.
Say it.
Seiko.
Seiko.
A spark.
To have.
A flame.
To hold.
Seiko. Beauty in motion.
Advanced towards precision. A vision.
Seiko. The future of time.
Some small people will take your family on a big adventure. The Borrowers. Begins Saturday on TNT.
Along with 50 other standard amenities, the Nissan Maxima GXE has a keyless entry system on the door. This system allows you to unlock doors, open the trunk, and even open windows automatically. But if you think the door is impressive, just imagine what's behind it. Now Lisa Maxima with a standard V6 for just $1,000 down and $289 a month for 36 months.
It's fun, fun, fun.
What's fun?
The Kids Club at Enfield Square every Tuesday at 9:30 in Center Court. Join the Kids Club and find something new, amazing, magical, and fun. Plus, you can meet the Kids Club pals. This Tuesday, November 23rd, join us for a very special Thanksgiving celebration.
Yeah, I want to go.
Then join the Enfield Square Kids Club every Tuesday at 9:30 at Center Court for quality entertainment, discounts, giveaways, and
Kids Club fun.
Once again, live from Washington, Larry King.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John F. Kennedy's press secretary, Pierre Salinger. Thank you, Pierre. What a harrowing tale Pierre has to tell. You were on a plane.
Yeah, I think, Larry, to explain it, I have to go back a couple of days. I left the White House on the 19th of November. The president was sending 6 members of his cabinet to Japan for an economic conference, and he'd asked me to join them to arrange a visit he was going to make to Japan in February of '64. He would have been the first president of the United States since World War II to visit Japan. We stopped in Honolulu for about 2.5 days and had a wide conference on the Vietnam situation, which was getting very critical. And then at 6 o'clock in the morning, on the 22nd of November, we took off from Honolulu for Tokyo. We were about 2.5 hours out of Honolulu. This is a presidential plane. I was sitting in the back, and suddenly...
Was it like Air Force 3 or something? Did they...
Yeah, Air Force 2. Anyway, somebody came and grabbed me and said, you have to go up in the front. And there's an office up there and a desk, and all the 6 cabinet members are sitting around the desk. And I walked in, and something was going on. And they handed me a dispatch from UP, and I looked at it, and it said that President Kennedy had been shot. And Dean Rusk said, go into the front of the plane and set up the communication with the White House. We're going to turn the plane around. I got the White House through the phone, and it was total confusion. I mean, it was just no way of knowing.
Didn't have a wrong code word?
And also, we didn't have our code names with us. And, but it really was confusion, too. We weren't getting anything that was saying, well, he was shot, but he's all right. You know. And then suddenly, the code name came. I hear somebody saying to me, Wayside, stand by. That was my code name. And then every 30 seconds for about 5 minutes, Wayside, stand by. And then suddenly I hear...
Plane still going to Japan?
No, we turned around. In fact, our original plan was to go to Dallas. And then I hear the voice say, Wayside, Lancer is dead. Lancer was the code name of the president. And it was a shock. I mean, I walked in and told the cabinet members what had happened. There were tears. We headed for Honolulu. We had to stop there to get some more, to refuel the plane. And then we headed for Washington. The idea of flying 11 hours with this terrible thing in our brains and our feeling, I did something absolutely crazy. I started a poker game. It was a wild poker game in which everybody was playing, but they were crying. And when we flew and we arrived in Washington around 1 o'clock in the morning, and I took a car immediately to the White House, and President Kennedy's body had just arrived there, and there was a religious ceremony in the East Room. And when the ceremony came to an end, Jackie Kennedy came up to me and said, Pierre, this must be a terrible day for you. Why don't you spend the night here in the White House? I'd never spent the night in the White House. Anyway, I went upstairs, and there was Larry O'Brien and Ken O'Donnell. We talked till about 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I went to sleep. And then at 7 o'clock, the phone next to my bed rings, and it's the operator. She says, Pierre, the president wants to speak to you. And suddenly I had this idea that I'd had a nightmare, some terrible nightmare. And then I hear this voice saying, Pierre, this is Lyndon Johnson. And there it was certain he was dead.
Now, during those 11 hours in playing poker, was there drinking too?
Not much drinking.
Was there funny stories? Was there exchanges of, sometimes in that closed confinement, things can get out of hand.
I don't think there was any humor at all. I mean, obviously
sometimes
people,
you let it out.
Yeah, I know. Shouting at each other about the cards and things like that. But also, I mean, there were meetings taking place at the same time. Dean Rusk had sent a message to the State Department saying to call all of our embassies and see if there was any slight possibility that they were getting any kind of information that this was a foreign operation to kill John Kennedy. So, I mean, people were focusing on the event, but this poker game just went on, and as a matter of fact, when it came to an end, I had $800 in my pocket, which in those days was a lot of money.
Didn't you feel also totally out of it on a plane, in a confined place?
I was totally out of it, and, well, I mean, from the moment that it happened, my life had changed. I mean, the idea that he'd been killed was just such a shock for me. And I have to tell you the truth that I wanted to leave the White House immediately. And President Johnson wouldn't let me. He said, you've got to stay. So I stayed. Not very long, but I stayed. But I have to also be honest with you and tell you that every day that I worked there, I drank a full bottle of scotch just to survive. Every day, every day, every day. And you know, in the first 4 days, and I'm sure my former press colleagues here will agree, you know, it was on live all the time, but my normal thing at the White House was to give a press conference twice a day. But then I had to give 2 press conferences in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. One was a press conference about what was going to happen on the funeral, and then, of course, what was going to happen with the new president. And that was
serving 2.
Yeah, I was serving 2 things at the same time.
During the funeral, where were you? I mean, were you in the walk across the bridge and up to the cemetery?
Yes, I was. I'd stayed in my office. I was working. Actually, I had the television on all the time. I saw Lee Harvey Oswald get killed. That was another shock at the time.
You were in the White House?
I was in the White House, and
Okay, now we've asked these others. You're drinking the scotch. We asked Ben, a very close friend, Jim and Hugh, who had to cover this, because Harry knew him. Well, were you working or grieving?
I was doing both. I couldn't afford not to work. I mean, it was a job that I had to do to keep the information coming in as to what was going on as far as, I mean, there was enormous planning for the funeral. At the same time, we were in contact with a lot of foreign people who were coming to the events. We had to announce who they were. Charles de Gaulle was the first one who said he was going to come, and that was extremely important because he was a very important leader in France at that time. So all these things had to be kept in shape so that I could announce that to the press.
And at the same time, you're grieving.
And at the same time, grieving.
Let's get some more calls. Columbia, Maryland. Hello.
Yes, good evening, Mr. King.
Hi.
I was in Cape Town, South Africa when it occurred, having dinner in a nightclub with some shipmates. I was in the Navy then. And when the manager came over and told us, I'm coming here to tell you that, knowing you're American, I want to let you know that we heard your president was shot. So we gathered around a radio and confirmed the fact that it had happened. The most moving portion of this whole story is the next morning when I reported to my ship, there were probably 24 ships in harbor as well, and every ship in the harbor waited until we raised our flag 2 block and then lowered at half staff, at which time all the other ships in the harbor followed suit, and as I recall, saluted us with their ship's horns.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
What can one say to that? We all have our moments.
Well, I've heard some people calling in and also here about how abroad, as well as in America, people were shaken. I mean, I made a lot of trips after that. And, for example, I went to Laos, and about 2 days after I arrived, a man had walked close to 100 miles from where he was just to tell me that he had understood that John Kennedy was killed, that he had remembered that, and he wanted to meet somebody who had been close to John Kennedy. And I was quite struck by that, that this man had walked 100 miles to tell me that.
I remember going to Turkey one time on a ship, and we invited some people. We had our own ship. We were locked, and we asked some people to come on the ship with us. And suddenly this fellow said, I mean, are you, the Turk, said, are you the fellow that used to work with John Kennedy? And then he went on in a long story of the terrible thing that happened to him at that particular time. So it was a worldwide event.
Chicago, hello.
Yes, Larry.
Yeah.
I go through this for the last 30 years, every year, and it's the same thing, and I really have trouble with it. I was driving a pop truck, a beverage truck at the time, and I'm on the southwest side, and my route was on the southeast side, which was all black. And I remember walking into the store, and this old lady ran the store, and she was kneeling in the middle of the floor, crying. Well, I ran up to her, and I said, April, what's wrong? And she kept saying, he's gone, he's gone. And I said, well, who's gone? You want me to call a doctor? And she said, no, they killed the president. He's gone. Well, a few customers had walked in, and there I was, 2 hours later, kneeling with these people, and we're praying. And I'm looking around and thinking to myself, I'm the only white fella here, and yet I felt the same pain that these people have been going through for so many years, and the outlook that they had in the future. And it was just taken away from them. Not just our whole country, but I mean, for those people that have suffered so much. And I just think about that every year, and it's just a great loss.
Harry?
And every year I go through the same thing.
Harry, comment?
I am just thoroughly convinced that until we really and truly understand what promise there was, you know, I think about it, everybody was deathly afraid of the Third World War, the nuclear holocaust. And at no time in our history have we come as close as we did with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And for whatever the reasons were, Kennedy confronted it, it settled, it pulled back, and a world heaved a sigh of relief. And from that moment on, I think everybody really felt that a Third World War would begin to become the most remote of possibilities. Somehow some sanity had all of a sudden entered the global perspective of thought. But whether it's a black woman, or whether it's a Native American, or whether it's a Peace Corps volunteer in Senegal, or some head of state, the Kennedy period and the Kennedy force had held enormous meaning for people.
Paris,
and without that,
one thing from Harry, because what you said is very, very interesting, but it should be extended somewhat. Because Kennedy did save us from nuclear war, but Kennedy and Khrushchev, after that crisis, also understood that there had to be a breakdown of the confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the dialogue that went on between the two countries in the period after the Cuban Missile Crisis could have changed the world if it had gone all the way.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, and unfortunately, he was assassinated, Khrushchev was thrown out of power. I mean, it's hard to predict things when a president has been killed as to how he's going to go ahead on something he's doing. But he was going ahead very effectively. Khrushchev was with him on it, and it could have been the end of the Cold War much earlier.
Paris, California, hello.
Hello. Yes, I had just had my baby daughter that morning when we got the news of Kennedy's death. I think one reason why people can't get over it is they feel they've been lied to. They feel that all the truth has never come out completely. And that's why there is still such a deep grief, because they don't think that everything was told.
Your baby was born that day?
Yes.
Or your daughter is now 30 years old tomorrow?
30 years old tomorrow. Her name is Kathleen Mary. And
happy birthday to Kathleen. Ben, what do you make of that?
Well, I'm the wrong person to ask about that. I have studied it as much as I can. I've tracked down, I spent 30 subsequent years as a journalist looking at. I believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed
But do you believe she's right in that part of this pain is not knowing?
Evidently. I mean, I saw some recent poll that...
90%?
90% think it's wrong, 60% think the CIA did it, was involved. I mean, it's just incredible.
Jim?
And it's this fear that people prey on.
It could be the reverse, though. The fact that so much promise and hope was taken away with the death of this man, that it's hard to believe that one lone crazy man with a rifle could have done this thing. And it in itself feeds this idea that it was a conspiracy in spite of what the facts show.
You know, another factor is that truth is always stranger than fiction. And in most novels, things are a little neater. And because there's still confusion about Lincoln's assassination, you know, and so we never will feel secure that we know all the truth about it. That confusion will remain, gentlemen.
We'll be back with more. We'll talk about the legacy after this.
What are you doing here, buddy? You invited me to lunch. I did? Honey, Cousin Dave's here for lunch.
He is? Oh, Ed.
Cousin Dave, we got a little problem here. No lunch, huh? Well, we can go to Wendy's. Yeah!
Luckily, Wendy's has a 99-cent super value menu with delicious junior bacon cheeseburgers, chili, baked potatoes, and biggie fries. And for just $1.99, get our hamburger kids meal.
We ought to have lunch here all the time. We do. We do.
Wendy's, you don't pay more, you just get more.
Home for the holidays in your hometown. For 68 years, IGA Supermarkets have been a part of hometown holidays, while the buying power of 4,000 IGA stores means hometown savings, like refreshing products from Coca-Cola and Pillsbury pie crusts, perfect for holiday baking. Hometown holidays. At IGA, it's one more reason we're hometown proud.
IGA. A grapefruit drink that's actually sweet? Yeah. Ocean Spray Ruby Red Grapefruit Juice drink. It's got a sweet taste that's really different. If this is grapefruit juice, this is sweeter Ruby Red. Surprisingly sweet Ocean Spray Ruby Red.
It's Thanksgiving again. Why not try something the whole family can feast on? MCI friends and family members can save up to 50% on daytime calls on Thanksgiving and lots of other holidays throughout the year.
Lasers. Satellites. Cellular data networks. What exactly have we launched here? UPS Total Track. The only tracking system that can confirm delivery of your air and designated ground packages coast to coast in seconds.
This package was signed for at 9:26 this morning by Mr.
The arms race may be over, but the package race is just heating up.
Now, once again, Larry King.
The new frontier wasn't without fear and anxiety. America was one of the superpowers, dueling it out for world supremacy. JFK's passing was felt around the globe. Watch. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev had led the world to the brink of nuclear war, but also worked out a landmark ban on nuclear testing. On November 22nd, Sergei Khrushchev remembers there were tears in the Kremlin.
Father became very nervous because at that time his thought was that he really can deal with Kennedy and they can do better, especially in the questions of the disarmament.
The assassination proved JFK was more than an American leader. He belonged to the world.
He certainly captured Europe, too, as well as the United States. I think around the world, he had a terrific support. He provoked something that it's outside the kind of normal realm of the political thing. It was more to do with a kind of spiritual. And my God, he was lots of the other as well.
Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is, Ich bin ein Berliner.
That absolutely stunned that crowd. And there were literally tens of thousands of people there who heard him say that. And the total atmosphere changed, not just with respect to those people, but that changed German-American relationships. Bang, just like that. Well, Kennedy had that gift, and it's just a straight gift.
And on November 22nd,
Berlin erupted in agony that night. If I had to go out, and I had to take many taxis around town to go to various places where people were holding vigils. The tough Berlin cab drivers would turn and look at you and say, "Amerikanischer?" And you'd say, "Yeah," and they'd turn the meter off. They wouldn't charge you.
there was special agony for the Peace Corps, the president's worldwide troop of young Americans, volunteers, idealistic, out to change the world.
The fact that you're willing to do this for our country and in a larger sense, as the name suggests, for the cause of peace and understanding, I think should make all Americans proud and make them all appreciative.
They had done as he'd wanted and followed his lead, and now he was gone.
We took it so personally because this is the reason we were in Peace Corps. This is the reason we wanted to go and serve. And Kennedy had been shot, and that had been taken away, although in some ways it made you feel even more strongly that you wanted to continue and do something for Peace Corps.
But for the so-called best and brightest, the ambitious young brain trust Kennedy had mustered to move the country forward, the assassination was a killing blow.
It was very, very hard for me, and I want to tell you that I was so struck by John Kennedy. I have to be honest, for at least 3 or 4 months, I could only survive by drinking an entire bottle of scotch every day, and I just couldn't make it.
Well, on the Harvard campus, of course, it was crushed because there were so many Harvard professors there. And more than that, so many of the hopes of the young professors had been attached to Kennedy.
So what was JFK's biggest accomplishment?
I think it was to renew the confidence of the American people in our country, in our destiny, in what we could do, to make everybody feel that the impossible was possible, that you could volunteer, just as an example, you could volunteer for the Peace Corps and go to Africa and change things. You could even change yourself.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And somehow sitting here in the 90s, you know, once again, there's a feeling that, remember the things that we held valuable to be in the 60s? Well, they still are, and there's still hope. And despite the enormous impact of those deaths, I think that it was a very severe pruning of a very strong tree, and I think the tree is about to blossom again.
Is it you? Is the tree going to blossom again?
You have to hope always that it's about to blossom. And I don't think there's any reason now to think that it's going to be blighted. There's a reasonable hope that things are going to get better. Maybe it's because I'm an optimist.
Jim?
I feel the same way. Optimism goes with journalism. You have to think that all these problems can be solved, or you couldn't ask questions about them.
Harry?
I have great hope. I am not too sure how optimistic I am. I would like to be optimistic, but there is so much that beleagues our country, the world. I mean, I've traveled an awful lot. Chaos is everywhere. And some would suggest that in this global chaos, there's a greater truth that's being sought after. But the price we're paying, what's going on here in America, the plight of black people, unemployment, AIDS, dope, cocaine, indecisions, absence of decisiveness. Too many things are out there to make one cautious about optimism.
Ben?
Well, trees bloom. That's what trees are for. And of course it will bloom again, but it'll be a different tree.
Maybe a different fruit.
And it could be a different fruit, yeah.
Pierre?
Well, I think that we're living in a new world disorder, and I think we have to remember history. And one of the things that we've got to remember is how crises were solved back more than 30 years ago by dialogue, by understanding. And I'm afraid we've gone through a lot of administrations who have forgotten that and have not dealt with that problem the same way.
What do you, Ben?
Well,
You know, one thing we haven't said here tonight is that the reason that the Kennedy assassination made such an impact on the world is that it was known instantaneously. Everybody knew it. And that is because of the developments in communications. I mean, think how long it took for the world to know that Lincoln had died. Think how long it took for even an assassination attempt of Roosevelt. It instantaneously, everybody knew it that night. Look at where everybody was, and you hear people who are in African jungles, and they knew it. And that means not only they knew it quickly, but it multiplied by 1 million the number of people who knew it.
Would he have been a great president, Jim?
Larry, I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I think I agree with Ben that he was on the come, and on personal terms, I think he might have been a great president. I can't go beyond that. I don't know.
You?
Yeah. I tend to think he would have, because there's always the potential for evolving into something better, and he was a learning individual.
Harry?
I believe that events would have made him a great president because he had the ability to respond to events in a way that we landed on our feet. In his time, he had Martin Luther King. In his time, he had Khrushchev. In his time, he had a lot of people who were shaping history, and he fell in sync with them. He was pushed to many things that he achieved. I look at Clinton today, for instance, and I had often said to myself how sad it is that this potential is not being supported by the presence of a king or men and women like existed in the 60s. It made a big difference.
We're running out of time. Pierre, would he have been a great president?
Well, I was his spokesman, so I've got to be honest. I look at him as a president who made mistakes, a president who made big successes, but I believe that as he was moving forward, he was getting better and better and better. I believe he would have won a second term. If he had had 2 terms, America and the world would be different.
Thank you all very much. Hugh Downs, Jim Lehrer, Harry Belafonte, Ben Bradley, Pierre Salinger. Thanks to all who participated. To Carrie Stevenson, Tom Farmer, our producers, and everyone associated with TNT for these past 2 hours. A lot went into putting this together, and a lot of people were responsible for it. Thanks for joining us. Good night.
This may seem like any other day, but it's not. Because now people will be able to talk to one another in a brand new way. That's because across the U.S. and Canada, leading cellular communications companies have joined together to create MobileLink, a new standard in cellular service. So now, whenever you need to stay in touch, MobileLink will make it as simple as a phone call. MobileLink.
Hello? I'm glad you called.
It's simply the way to communicate. To order, call 1-800-995-4000.
Car has finally grown up. Introducing the Volvo 850 Sports Wagon.
There are just 2 reasons to buy a Macintosh personal computer instead of a PC. 1, Macintosh does more. 2, Macintosh costs less. which really makes your choice quite simple.
Islands. There were few capital ships available, and they were ill-suited for narrow channel warfare. The PT boats were. They were fast,